Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm an advocate for critical thinking. A couple of years ago, I read a book on how to write a novel. I did not succeed in writing one, but one sentence in the book stuck to me. To be a good author, you need to be able to seamlessly move between detail and abstraction. It stuck to me because I realized that this was not only a recipe for writing, but also any kind of thinking. The simple mental model what has accompanied me ever since, and I use it to check my own thoughts by simply asking two questions. What are the facts that support your thoughts? And which goal does your thought support if you think it through to the end? This approach is so self evident that I considered not doing a video on it because felt kind of embarrassed by the simplicity. But then every day when I read the news, talk to friends, or watch myself make mistakes, I realize that this approach may be simple, but not rigorously applied at all. So I want to talk about that mental model a bit today because it may help you as well. And the way I see it is basically this. You have the mind and the outside world, and our mind has goals, and to reach those goals, it needs to influence the outside world through language or action. For this, like a computer, basically, it processes information from the outside world and produces interpretations or judgments that help take actions. A simple example is the goal of survival. When your mind gets data from the eyes that a lion is running towards you, it will produce a judgment that you're in danger and need to flee or fight. The more concrete the practical implications and the more available the facts are, the easier it is to make an accurate judgment. That is why people tend to be less ideological in life and death situations, while they tend to get carried away by flawed interpretations if the subject is more abstract. So, since it's a lot of work and often complex to make accurate interpretations of abstract subjects, people often resort to ready-made interpretations by others. So they skip the evidence part and copy paste existing interpretations. This is also called groupthink. This copy pasting is a great simplification, of course, and it wouldn't be a problem if you could 100% trust the interpretation or double checked it against its wider implications and supporting facts. But most people don't do that. What we get as a result is judgments that are inconsistent with people's actual goals or values or are not connected to facts. Let's look at three examples. First, the widespread belief that the world is getting worse. On the goal side, if you have a human centered worldview, you would have definitions for good, such as length of human life, comfort of life, number of armed conflicts, access to resources, and so forth. If your worldview is centered around ecology, your values might be no human cause negative impact to non human life on the planet, for example. Depending on this, the judgment on the status of the world might be right or wrong. If you care more about humans than about preserving the environment, all indicators point to the fact that human life is getting better and better year over year, as measured by indices such as the UN Human Development Index, which looks at health, education, and standard of living. If you care more about preserving the environment, then your judgment that the world is getting worse might be correct depending on how you define it, with resources and animal species shrinking due to humans and temperatures rising. But the sentence, the world is getting worse, is not usually used in this nuanced way, but as an overall statement, which most people would still consider as human centered. But from a human perspective, as I've shown, it's just not true. And the problem with this is that people don't think about what they mean exactly when they assume that the world is getting worse. Then they may, for example, support actions which preserve the status quo of the environment, but will harm human civilization without realizing it. Another example is the common belief that products made by hand are somehow morally superior to industrially produced products. The goal of people who prefer handmade products is something like manufacturers of products should be as happy as possible during work. The supporting facts would be something like people prefer to create a product with a hand versus operating machine or software. This may be true for some contexts, say when the manufacturer has enough time and can use their own creativity, and when the work is not physically straining. Imagine an artisan, for example. But I would claim that in the majority of contexts, manual labor does not make manufacturers more happy. Think of someone who does the same product hundreds of times, day in and day out. Think of child labor. Think of the hard physical work in mines, the metal industry, or agriculture in pre-industrial times. Do you think any of these people would prefer to continue working with their hand rather than operating a machine to do so, with less risk to their health and time spent? An image that is often used just because it looks nice is women on rice fields and in tea plantations. Let's do a reality check. Being a rice farmer in developing countries includes manual harvesting of rice, sowing, spading, sprinkling water, weeding, ridging, which means creating ridges in the field for better water management, carrying crops and other heavy objects. You think this is fun? In fact, rice cultivation has been reported as one of the most important causes of non-fatal occupational injuries, commonly reported among farmers and those involved in agricultural work. Despite the majority of cases where manual labor is by no standard morally superior, this belief has become a stereotype that is rarely verified anymore. One indicator for this is the absurd mentioning of manual labor on pizza packaging, advertising the fact that the pizza has been formed by hand. If you turn this around, supporting manual labor uncritically will actually support the goal all products should be made as manual as possible, creating medieval working conditions that we still see in developing countries today. Lastly, let's take the judgment queers should support Palestine. If this judgment makes sense, the fact and underlying goal would look something like this. On the goal side, you would have equal rights for people of all sexual orientations everywhere in the world. On the fact side, you would have queers have better rights in Palestine than in Israel. Of course, in reality, the facts are different. Homosexuality is considered taboo in Palestine, and LGBT people face persecution and violence. Same-sex sexual activity is prohibited in Gaza with a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment. In fact, Palestine is ranked as the 8th worst country in the world for LGBTQ plus rights. On the contrary, LGBTQ rights in Israel are considered the most developed in the Middle East. Same-sex sexual activity is legal sex change is possible, LGBT people can serve openly in the military, there's legal discrimination protection, same-sex adoption is possible, and so forth. So supporting Palestine as a queer person is absurd. This means that the goal these people are actually supporting is queer should be illegal and persecuted when found out all over the world. So why is this confusion happening? Because the same community is also against imperialism. The logic is, I'm against imperialism because as a queer person, I'm against any kind of repression. Israel occupies Palestine. Therefore, I'm against Israel and pro-Palestine. As I mentioned in another video, Israel does not occupy Palestine. But that is not even the main point here. The main point is that imperialism should be a secondary goal of the queer community. If the primary goal of sexual freedom is not met, this should cause a red flag and override any other areas. This does not happen because there is a lack of clarity regarding one's own goals and how they connect with one's judgments and the facts. Instead, they copy-pasted the judgment from the community because they heard the keyword imperialism. So when you hear a judgment and consider to copy-paste it, check the facts that are mentioned to substantiate it, and check which goal it supports when you think through its implications until the end. If you hear a judgment that rarely goes into details of evidence or its wider implications or goals, that should be a red flag. And similarly, don't assume that everyone shares your goals. If you don't check what are the fundamental values that someone or a community pursues, you will misinterpret their words and actions. One such example, which I also talked about before, is the stated goal and belief of Hamas that all Jews should be killed. If you still believe that there is any interest in a mutual ceasefire or a two-state solution by Hamas, it is because you're projecting your own goal of peace and human rights, and you're refusing to look at the facts. So going back to this model about details and abstraction, the problem is always if you get stuck in the middle area of judgments and don't move on the whole spectrum between facts and abstraction. And even though this model should be self-evident, almost like a how-to in thinking, I still find it useful to carry around in your head as a framework because apparently we all keep forgetting it. Thanks for watching and see you next time.